Patras. The next port at which we touched was Patras. It was the first Greek city I had seen. It lies under a high mountain, its houses appearing white against flat stretches of Greek vegetation. It was toward this greenness I decided to walk, for it was obviously there that the currants for which the city is celebrated were grown. We were told that merchants were already preparing to export for the Christmas trade. The sun was lying hot on the dry, light soil. The place seemed far enough from England, and yet I knew that fruit from its gardens would find its way to Dorset, would be distributed in blue paper bags from Boone's stores in Dorchester, and from the civil and military store in Weymouth. Currants for mince pies, sultanas for cakes, and the shops all warm and bright for Christmas, while outside, down by the backwater, cold, unobserved ripples would flood into and recede from dim miniature crevices in the half-submerged quayside masonry. Before we were out of town, we crossed several squares surrounded by mud houses. I liked the look of these open spaces. Pleasant they would be for children to play in through a long summer evening, the sounds of their voices carrying a tremulous and ill-defined momentary happiness to the heart of some Charles Lamb or William Blake poet, if such there be in Greece. Outside one house there was a man stood up in a barrel treading grapes, the sweet liquor bursting up between his horned toes. Now and again he would stoop to take and eat 2 or 3 globes from an unbroken cluster. We crossed the last square and, passing an ass tethered to a stake, made our way through a fence woven of bamboo rods. We now found ourselves in the vineyards. As far as we could see, the land was carefully cultivated and irrigated. Each plot was bordered by fig trees, orange trees, olive trees, and led on to another. Sometimes these plots were heavy with ripening grapes, and sometimes with neat rows of tomatoes. We were thirsty and would have liked to have eaten some of the fruit, and presently, coming up to an old man and woman, we asked permission to do so. As soon as they understood our petition, they pressed huge clusters upon us, and in a little time we found ourselves walking forward, our arms laden with grapes, the sweetest and the longest in shape I have ever tasted, and of a light pink colour. We now began walking toward a group of cypress trees that we could see in the distance. We found that in almost every case there were small bridges over the streams dividing the various grounds. The sun was drawing down to the horizon, and its rays were falling upon the dark, shining orange leaves, and upon the massed vine tendrils with a peculiar, still beauty. Strange realizations passed through me, and were gone swift as shadows. Was not just such a continuation of gardens, of peaceful cultivation, the fulfilment of what one's heart had always longed for? Were not these old people, so liberal with their produce, to be envied, shut away in complete security amidst these vineyards? The streams between the damp shelving banks murmured softly. It was still daytime, and yet dew-cool intimations of the classical evening were unaccountably apparent. A benediction as winning and as light as wine was suddenly present between the triangular leaves, had encircled the gnarled, illuminated olive trunks, had bewitched every uplifted stem in the green, fertile plain. Beyond the cypress trees we found there was a lane full of deep dust. We followed along it and were presently overtaken by a man riding astride on a tiny donkey. He had to bend his knees so that his feet should not touch the ground. Because the little beast, small as a mouse, would not mend her pace to his fancy, he struck her across her long ears over and over again. That momentary scene destroyed in 1 second my ideal meditations. The vicious strokes given with intent to injure, and the stubborn, unbroken gesture of the donkey as it turned its grey head to one side, were pretty reminders of the nature of things. Hoof or hand, tooth or claw, their mere presence ensures instruction as to the manners of life. To kick, to strike, to bite, to tear, is never far from their purpose. We cannot all be grapes and oranges and harmless green olives. We mammals can never hope to emulate the gentle civilization of the vegetable world. It is clear that we develop on other lines. Passing through the town, I saw several sick persons lying on their beds by open window or open door. We had already heard rumours of the dengue fever, of the plague. We encountered warm, fetid puffs of unsanitary air as we came along the street, alive with foreign children, and already with lamps lighted in the houses. I was up and on deck early the next morning because I wished to see the ship pass into the canal. We were sailing through the Gulf. To the south I could make out a city not unlike Patras, only standing in a larger plain and further from the sheltering mountains. I did not at first realise that I was looking at New Corinth. When I did, I was at pains to scan the landscape with wide-awake eagerness. I knew that somewhere within 3 miles of it was the site of Old Corinth, where St. Paul had stayed with Aquila and Priscilla, weaving tents with his hands. His followers were not to have company with fornicators, and yet it is well known that Corinth teemed with such roosters. It was in a letter to these citizens that this excitable theologian inaugurated his method of transvaluation, shifting the spiritual struggles of the Western world clean off the plane of reason. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. How extraordinary that the St. Paul style, as we read it in English, should have achieved the high tone it has. That unctuous tone, beyond anything dedicated, it seems, to tease the ears of catapult schoolboys home from the Christmas holidays. Slowly our ship passed down the canal, that canal which Nero had been the first to attempt to dig. On its perpendicular walls I could see certain rude drawings that the navvies had evidently cut for their own diversion. Crude as they were, they had a kind of classical vigour about them. A man, a dog, a lion. At length we were out on the other side and sailing northward toward Piraeus.